Thursday night, I am Thabo Mdluli, and thank you for joining us tonight as the country draws closer to the end of the year. In fact, we look at some of the highlights of 2021. And today we start by unpacking and rating the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa this year, from his handling of COVID-19, the economy, the elections, and how he fared as the country's leader in 2021. Here to help me unpack this, I'm joined by political analysts Sanusha Naidu, Dr. Mathekga, and Professor Sipho Seepe to be a part of the conversation tonight. And of course, our question of reflection: has the political leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa been effective? Send us your comments, or we'll take you live on 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Now, of course, as we reflect on this, let's take a listen to what the President has said about COVID-19.
This year, we must do everything in our means to contain and overcome the pandemic. This means intensifying our prevention, all the prevention efforts, and strengthening our health system. It also means that we must undertake a massive vaccination program to save lives and dramatically reduce infections across the entire population.
Let's get into that conversation then. Dr. Ralph and Professor Sipho Seepe and Sanusha, good evening, and thank you very much for your time joining us tonight here on In Focus. I want us to start here, looking at the relentless, persistent, and the prevalence of corruption, almost total absence of accountability, and almost the elusive dream of seeing people in orange overalls. Let's start there. Is this proof that the political leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa has been ineffective? Dr. Roth?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to colleagues, Prof and Sanusha there. I think, Thabo, the thing is that this presidency has anchored itself on one or two things, not a lot of things, and one of them was to fight against corruption, which is what the president actually crafted that ticket, the whole CR17 ticket, as it expressed itself even outside the ANC. It was about fighting against corruption and also building capacity within the state institution and also dealing with the economy. So it's very clear, Thabo, where we are about those things. I don't think corruption has been severely undermined. I think that if you look at what is happening on the fight against corruption, it's quite stagnant. I don't think the president can say, I've done exceptionally well. Well, there are certain areas, of course, where we have seen confidence in the institution, the NPA, and so forth. But still, you want to see resolute there. When it comes to the economy, Thabo, I also don't see much of progress there. We've been talking about fiscal consolidation, what to do with the increasing public sector wage bill. There is still some level of standstill in relation to that. So capacity of the state institution is still a challenge. He spoke about it today. So I think that clearly the president acknowledges that he has not achieved what he thought he would, and problems are quite deep. They emanate from within the ANC, and I think they are quite structural. Some of them go far back.
Yeah. Prof, unambiguous in his condemnation of corruption coming into his administration, but also throughout the administration. But there is something that says, still 166 billion rands in irregular expenditure uncovered by the Auditor General, the 15 billion rands being investigated by the SIU just on PPE contracts alone. He has not managed to rein in the stealing of his people, and it's unlikely that he'll be able to.
Well, I think in a sense what this points out to is what Ralph calls structural issues and also institutional issues. And it was always easy and convenient and opportunistic for us to always want to find a scapegoat to issues that are largely structural. But when the president comes in and comes up with certain promises, that I'll be able to deal with the issue of economic recovery, which he put on the table. I'll be able to deal with corruption, which he put on the table. I'll be able to deal with job creation. I think this is not the question of the jury's out. We know the results. There's been a total failure. in that regard. Instead, as people who are looking at business confidence, they say it has plummeted to the lowest level since the 1980s, when we used to have the state of emergency. So there's a real failure there that everybody acknowledges. But also, most importantly, is the people of this country who could not be lied to. Remember, this is the president, when he started, he was more into public relations. We had investor conference, we had all sorts of things. But those were public relations. They brought nothing. And he actually overpromised. And that was also one of the challenges that you face, that when you come out and overpromise and you don't deliver, it's very easy for people to find that you are actually failing. On coronavirus, even the people who used to support him, actually, Peter Bruce came up with a word called omnishambles. He says that the manner in which the government has been handling the coronavirus has been almost moving from one crisis to another. It has been a string of blunders. So even there, the government talks about a massive vaccination drive, but later it also acknowledged that for some reason they failed to get that message across. But the biggest challenge is on the issue of corruption, because he was presented as corruption bastard. But what we've seen also what people are suspecting as almost a selective approach to these issues, because we have seen people who seem to be aligned to him being maligned, or there have been allegations, but you have never seen almost an excitement to saying, let's deal with these people. So I don't, in as much as Ralph says there is a notion of confidence in some of the institutions, people on the ground don't experience it that way. They want to see that when the NPA charges, the NPA does not go to court and say, we don't have witnesses. The NPA does not go there and say, give us more time. When you charge people, the Constitution requires that the process must also be speedy. It must be speedy and it must be fair. And if you have cases that continue and for 2 years the NPA is not ready, that does not give a sense of confidence in the institutions. So there is a problem. So as far as at least the corruption, he has not been able to move with great speed there. As far as the economy has not worked, but the public relations exercise itself has not worked. Yeah. So what is very important is the message that comes from the voters saying, whatever you think you've been doing for the last 4 years is not working. Yeah. So you need to reconsider.
Is this a sign, Sanusha, of an inefficient or maybe even incompetent leadership? Or is it a sign of a leadership that is unable to exercise its authority?
Good evening, Tabu, Prof, and Ralph. I think my colleagues have essentially captured the essence of the crisis of the state, but also the crisis of leadership. And I think to answer your question in the most bluntest of ways, I think it's a combination of both. I think you have a leadership that came in with the idea that they were going to have this incredible PR exercise of turning things around. And unfortunately, I think the chalice has been so poisoned that he's unable to find the anecdote to turn it around. And so everything stops at the president. And the fact of the matter is he's not only dealing with the crisis of a bureaucracy that's in a state of shambles, but he's also dealing with a party that he doesn't know how to navigate in terms of trying to put it on the right track or trying to reconstitute it and try and get it to become a reconstituted, a recalibrated, and a kind of, changing its crisis from an illegitimate party to a legitimate party to a credible party, which of course we saw in the local government election. People didn't really, believe that this party is credible anymore, and this has been happening for the longest time ever. But I think also the crisis of his own attachment to a party and to the notions of nostalgia. And I think that's also something that we got to think about is, how much does President Ramaphosa kind of look at the days of nostalgia when he was negotiating at CODESA, negotiating the transition, being the kind of unifier. And right now, this is not the same structural conditions we are in. After 27 years, you've got to recognize that sometimes, is it still salvageable in this sense? I think he's very nostalgic in that way, but he's also very committed to a party. He's still very much a party man. And I think that sometimes acts as a kind of stumbling block for him in terms of when you looked at his testimony before the Zondo Commission, both as president of the ANC and president of the Republic. He comes almost short in a sense, because he takes you to that point where he says, we're going to get things done. We will not defend the indefensible. But then he goes back to he doesn't have the traction, or he doesn't able to find that tipping point to push the party and say it's now or not. Yeah. And I think it's really that challenge of how do you assess a presidency, because a lot of this is inherited. It just didn't come overnight.
Yeah. Talking about that attachment, considering that attachment, Sanusha, did his administration manage to detangle itself enough from the networks of patronage and corruption that were seen to have crippled the state-owned enterprises in the previous administration?
It's a difficult question to answer, Thabo. I think there's a lot that's happening that we only know in terms of what we've seen. There's a lot that's going on that we are unaware of, or we kind of don't have the evidence to prove. And I'm not sure if he's been able to disentangle himself from it. I think at times he gets entangled, and his cabinet, in a sense, he has to satisfy particular constituencies. He's got Labour, he's got the SACP, the Tripartite Alliance, he's got other members in terms of who he brings into his cabinet. We saw one cabinet reshuffle in this year. But again, does this mean that he's going to have another reshuffle before 2023? Next year is a pivotal year for him as the president of the party. So I think at the end of the day, those networks, those dynamics that we see that unfold in a democracy is something that we've got to understand, that it doesn't only pertain to, whether it's the opponents in the ANC, but it's also the questions of how these networks operate. What kind of promises does he have to fulfill now in going forward? And I think these are the challenges. Would you like to, in a way, we've got to understand as well that nothing is perfect, but we also live in a context where a lot of these challenges around how democracies work in practice comes back to the question of operationalization. Let me give you one example. The reforming of the public sector, the question of the public service bill and reforming of the public sector. That's taking ages because the president has to deal with bureaucracies that don't necessarily support him as well. Yeah. So he's inherited a bureaucracy, but at the same time, was he able to change that bureaucracy? Unfortunately, I think the deep-seated nature and the percolation of what we've inherited from the last 27 years is with us, and it's very, very deep.
Stay with us as we continue to assess the current presidency in the current conditions. And our question of reflection tonight: has the political leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa been effective? Let's get your views. 072-110-5584. Otherwise, tweet us at Newzroom405. In Focus continues in a moment. Welcome back live with us tonight. You're in Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405, as we continue to assess this presidency in the current conditions and its performance in leadership. We look now at the track record of President Cyril Ramaphosa in managing the economy. Ralph, you've already mentioned, a little bit of that. Let's talk about some of the issues that would have been a priority: creating jobs through infrastructure and mass employment programs. At some point in the year, he spoke about creating 800,000 jobs. These would have come, for example, 300,000 would have come from the education assistance, and another 60,000 would have come from various other projects in municipal reconstruction, and another 6,000 would have come from home healthcare workers or something of that nature. How many jobs has this economy really created with a contraction now in the third quarter of 1.5%?
Thabo, we've been shedding jobs. We're sitting somewhere about 34.9%. Actually, that has been the story so far since the COVID hit. We have seen that happening, the shrinkage of jobs. And in South Africa, it's almost like you no longer even need statistics. It just looks quite desperate. And I think those are some of the issues that were pushed forward, that there will be capacity being built so that infrastructure expenditure can also affect those priorities. But we have not seen that happening, Thabo. And I think this is where the problem has also been. The vehicle, which is your public service that you want to use to effect this employment creation, you also need capacity within that vehicle. If you are Yeah, public service is also just bleeding money left and right. Look at how much opportunity we lose in public expenditure. If you look at it, the best case scenario in South Africa in public expenditure, if you are lucky, you just get the product that you get or you purchase. But the whole idea that you'll have the forward linkages of public expenditure being tailored to create jobs, Prof, and to create sustainable forward linkages in the economy, that's never the thinking. The whole process is not really wired in that way. So we often also even talk about a foreign direct investment. People sometimes ask us the basics. Where are you going to invest? Sometimes you're going to invest in what? You are losing capacity in energy generation. If you cannot power the economy, I really don't understand how basic does it really get. You just cannot spin the darkness, Thabo. I mean, this is the picture that you get when it comes to attempt to try to push the economy. Look at small and medium enterprises. The restaurant, you go around, they get hit by power cuts. They cannot sustain, they cannot survive under this condition. And again, the prolonged COVID crisis. This is when you need the public service to be so well marshaled. But unfortunately, we have actually seen the opposite. In South Africa, since the COVID hit, instead of the state capacity being seen, gathering, being seen becoming better, we've actually seen the decline, actually, when it comes to state capacity. And it's quite sad that things got to this point.
Yeah. The scarcity, Prof, of opportunity and the cutthroat nature of the private sector, but also SOEs continuing to collapse, leading many to say this current government under the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and maybe even the previous one, could have failed dismally to transform the economy. Would that be a correct assessment?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a general failure. And part of it, first with the SOEs, President Ramaphosa wrote a report. He actually led a commission that looked into the SOEs, and he was also given the responsibility to turn them around as a deputy president. And especially with ESCOM from 2015, that has been a dismal failure. We also know that as a matter of fact, that once he took over, we also had load shedding coming back, and we had people who had somehow addressed that. And we have somebody who is in charge of ESCOM who tells us that we have to almost wait for the next coming 5 years. And when you are an investor, you, as Ralph put it, how are you going to invest when you cannot be assured of the existence of energy, electricity? So those are the challenges that you are facing. But also we have created also a society of entitlement. So there's a sense where we think that government must become a solution. Even this type of discussion that we have, the notion that this is a contribution that society is going to make is also missing. There's a lot of money that gets thrown in an attempt to try to address issues. But until such time that you have people who think that they have a stake other than simply protest, then we are going to go somewhere. But this culture of entitlement that every now and then we have to throw money is not going to solve the problem. What we need to do is to start putting money in productive sectors of the economy so that people can become gainfully employed. And the whole idea of infrastructure as a vehicle is something that we have not exploited. But we do have a backlog of infrastructure. We have people who are able-bodied. We should actually be bringing those people. We should have a Marshall Plan. But what we have promises that are more pie in the sky. And therefore, failure is already written even in our thinking. But for me, it is not only about what your government can do for you, but what we can also do for this country.
So, but why is it, though, Prof, that with that capacity that we have and capable people that we have who are just sitting and folding their hands, we are unable to inspire them, particularly with the policies that are in place? We seem to be once again at a point where you see a whole lot of contradictions amongst his leadership as the president, which I'm sure people who are capable sitting watching that, they're looking at this and saying, this will paralyze you if you even dare touch it.
Yeah, well, I think what we need to do also is to be careful of the language that we use. We have demobilized our people. when you listen to people go to for elections, parties go there and say, we will deliver. So what you do, you tell people that all you need to do is to vote, and then there'll be jobs, there'll be housing, so that process, and that's why we have what you call service delivery protest, because people expect delivery that has been part of the discourse. But that discourse is the demobilizing. Instead of us saying, this is where we will play. I remember when I was an advisor to the Minister of Defense, one of the things that when we spoke to young people, they were willing to subject themselves into the training skills that the military can provide. And when you go to the military, almost every skill is there. You're talking about auto electrician, you talk about building, you're talking about, and if we had put young people through those skills and the discipline as they wanted, these were young people who were willing to say, no, we are willing to try this, but we threw it. So there is a challenge that we need to also change our own language, the language that says the government will do this for you, as opposed to saying we will all participate to make sure that we win. No government can actually turn things around by having people who are simply waiting for government to deliver. And unfortunately, we have embraced the language. And actually, all parties in this country have embraced the language that they will deliver service better than others, as opposed to say, can we be partners in building this economy? And when we do that, it does not become the responsibility of one person or a government. It becomes the responsibility of the South African nation.
Sanusha, mentioning earlier that President Cyril Ramaphosa, a party animal, by all means entrenched in the traditions and attached to that history, that nostalgia of being in the party. But at a national level, though, we've seen a manifestation of the divisions within that party playing out, where there was even failure to agree, for example, on simple things. Now, we saw at COP26 varying statements coming from the Department of Energy, coming from Environmental Affairs, and you're seeing these divisions playing out. And if you're an investor and you're sitting and watching that, I'm sure you wouldn't be certain exactly what will happen if you put your money there.
Yeah, Thabo, and I think, I wouldn't say he's a party animal, but I think he's a very, very loyalist party member. And on the issue of investor confidence, I mean, you've got bills in Parliament that are currently there that contradict the President's economic recovery program. It contradicts the infrastructure program. It contradicts the skills, the capability of the state, the capacity building that Ralph spoke about, the challenges that young people face that Prof spoke about. Because at the end of the day, some of those legislation are actually creating bottlenecks in terms of creating an ease of business, creating an investor confidence. Investors are not sure what this means in terms of implementation. They're not clear about how this is going to impact on their long-term sustainability and viability in the economy. And I think that also is a questions of institutional voids that exist in the economy and exist in the social fabric of society. I think on the issue of expectation and entitlement, I think the way in which we went about this democracy as well, and I think democracies around the world suffer this fault line, that they create expectations that the state is the actor that will deliver, and it will actually facilitate all of this. And I think, unfortunately, we then end up in a situation, and particularly in the context of South Africa, where key issues of equity, transformation, socio-economic justice, and social justice struggles are critical to people's material transformation and lives and livelihood. We end up in a situation where people become almost, reliant on the fact that the state has to provide that. But in terms of small business, they can't survive, not just in the COVID years. They can't survive when they can't access financing. There's limited opportunities when you look at financing. And of course, when you come to implementation of policy and implementation and operationalization of some of these processes and policies, it's a completely different set of issues that unfold in terms of who gets access and who doesn't get access. So I think at the end of the day, what we must be very clear about is there coherence in what the programs of the state are? Is there understanding in society of what the role and responsibility and the social contract is? And most importantly, is there coherence between the legislation and what's being discussed in Parliament that's going to basically act as oversight?
Yeah, we'll come back. I want to touch that a little bit more. Is there also creativity and imagination particularly in those policies that we're putting forward based on the nature of the challenges that the country is currently going through. Right, let's get your views tonight. 072-110-5584. And the political leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa being effective. We'll get your views in a moment. Stay with us.
4 months since I stood here before the joint sitting of this parliament to present to the nation the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. Since the launch of the plan, we have focused on 4 priority interventions: a massive rollout of infrastructure throughout the country, a massive increase in local production, an employment stimulus to create jobs and support livelihoods, and the rapid expansion of our energy generation capacity.
Right, we're back with you there, President, outlining some of the plans as far as the economic recovery plan is concerned. Sanusha, before the break, we were talking about policies and ideas that are in place, almost sounding like a stuck record, man. It feels like as orchestrators of the economy, they are lacking creativity and imagination. We've been talking about this for years and years. It's just not being done, and we're not moving forward.
Yeah, Thabo, I think we all have been hearing the same narrative and the same discussion about what needs to be done to redesign the industrial policy, recreate, stimulate the economy. I mean, the president speaks about 4 areas: electricity generation. He talks about job creation, and of course, the job numbers come out, and it's much worse than what we anticipated. Not taking into account the youth unemployment factor. I think the skills deficit as well is critical in this. But also, I think are we being, imaginative enough in terms of understanding how do we redesign the economy in terms of the fact that there needs to be complementarity. So, for example, we need infrastructure. There's no doubt about that. We need connectivity. We need logistics. We need not just services. We need movement of goods and people. But we also be able to need the fact that you need to also have the ability to understand that to connect the economy, you need to make things cheaper. So take, for example, the whole question of spectrum. Take, for example, the whole question of data. Right now in South Africa, I think the cost of data in South Africa is probably one of the highest in the world, or in the top 10 of being the highest in the world. Every time we have load shedding, people are finding new ways that they can afford to actually be connected. People are using Wi-Fi connectors, they're using backup battery packs and so forth. But this is all costly. For people who are indigent, who are marginalized, who are living below the poverty bottom line, they can't afford this. But how do we actually make those things which are easy fixes, things that we can actually create in terms of creating the more kind of cascading effect around infrastructure development? It doesn't only start with big infrastructure. It starts with small infrastructure. Yeah. It starts with actually your roads. I drive around in Cape Town, or I drive around in Johannesburg. The potholes just, not so much in Cape Town, but definitely in Johannesburg, massive. So I think at the end of the day, we've got to find that spark. And unfortunately, I think there's too much of macroeconomic thinking and not enough stimulation of the microeconomy.
Dr. Ralph, I mean, besides of course, glaring failures and shortcomings of some individuals, particularly that hold important positions, for example, at municipalities, but there seems to be a lack in will or even in capacity for someone then to jump and come up with a new creative idea, that will be relevant to the kind of challenges that we're dealing with right now in our economy.
It's crisis management at this point, and unfortunately, it seems as if it doesn't leave the space for that creativity. I mean, whenever I look at this government and I listen to news, I follow news day in, day out, I listen to great speeches about the triple challenge and, the way in which we frame our problems. We are probably the best in the world when it comes to framing our problems. We will have 4 areas, major areas of intervention and so forth. You look at it, it looks so good. And when I drive around, I then look at municipalities such as that of Lichtenberg in Northwest, whereby a company said that, look, we are closing shop here. That is Clover, South Africa. We are closing shop because it's just impractical to exist within this municipality. It's dysfunctional. There's protest, power cuts, and everything else. So the basics is what matters here, Thabo. I don't think we are in a position to indulge and say to someone, we are going to go to Mars in the next 5 years. I think that no one will take us seriously. We should try to get back the streets of Johannesburg. Go drive around the CBD of Johannesburg yourself there, and tell me, what do you see there? If someone tells you that they want to turn it into Dubai, would you be listening to them now at the state that it is, or would you prefer that they get into the basics of how at least it can function, get back the safety? The problem is that I don't know whether it helps us psychologically as a nation. We like to look sophisticated about our problems, whereas actually they are very, very much basics. Can you get the robots to function so that people can get to work on time? Can you just get the water to flow? Those are the basic things that we need to just get back and remind ourselves that those are the basics that should go in order for humanity to exist well. Let's forget about these big dreams, infrastructure, this and that. I mean, I live in Limpopo partially, Thabo. For the last 35 years, I've been having to draw water with a 200-liter tank. I mean, when you tell me you are dreaming about Singapore in Johannesburg, you are not talking to me. When you talk about all this massive infrastructure, you are not talking to me. I want to see the pipes of water supplying the village. That's how basic it gets, so that people can have the basics, can have good road infrastructure. Let's just get back to the basics. Let's just get back to that agenda where we have the basics and we are pursuing that at least. All these other things about the integrated development, this and that, oh, please give me a break.
I think we do have some kind of a program called Back to Basics, particularly at municipal level. But Prof Seepe, if we are unable to supply efficient and secure energy just as a start to the country, and that is one of the key areas where we would say the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa has not come up with glowing colors.
Yeah, I think you should remember during the period of Ramaphosa, and it also surprised us on what basis there was this Ramaphosa. This president who went to give a speech about fast trains that will move with great speed from Johannesburg to Cape Town or Durban. And the same president was stuck in a train from Ga-Rankuwa to Pretoria for almost 4 hours. This is what Ralph talks about, that if you don't get the basics right, then you're not going to get anywhere. The same applies to the issue of schooling. The former president talked about the simple things, that triple T, that you must have the teachers at school, they must be on time, there must be textbooks. If we can do the most simplest of these things, then we can get somewhere. And when you look at the National Development Plan, it's not even trying to come up with saying you go to Mars. It says the first thing that we need to do if we're going to move forward is to build the capacity of the state. That let's try to make sure that when the people are there, when they are employed, they are able to do the work that they're supposed to do, and there is accountability, the most basic things. But I'm also saying, when you talk about even one of the things that has not been raised, and which we should be talking about, is that the economy, today's economy, has actually changed. And we need to also ask whether even our own institutions, like universities, are they producing the graduates for the economy of tomorrow, or are they producing graduates of economy that no longer exist? So we are not even moving with the times. And if we are going to produce people who are going to graduate to unemployment, then there is also a problem with also the type of institutions and the thinking that come from those institutions. But the basic things are, there are those things that have to do with accountability when people are employed. And we are actually failing. And part of it goes back to what Sanusha was saying. Sanusha was saying that when you are also embedded in some stakeholder relations, where you have to appease the unions, when some of those unions might be the ones who are part of the problem, then you are not going to move forward. And I think Sanusha is also correct that we started with almost dreaming in 1994. We talked about the rainbowism and all sorts of things and the miracle nation. But there's no miracle. Nations that succeed, they work. But what we also have now is the nostalgia of even something that never existed. So the sooner we get out of that past to say now we are in government and challenges are different and the decisions have to be made and there should be less speeches, there should be less public relations, but it should be hands on deck, the better for this country.
Ralph touched on the market-friendly approach to the economy or fiscal policies. That has been, of course, a topic of discussion. Fiscal consolidation being one of the approaches that are being taken by this particular administration. Ralph, what do you find particularly wrong about that approach?
Well, the thing is, first of all, there cannot even be a clear commitment around that. I mean, we need to manage the budgets, no doubt about it. We need to be able to rein in expenditure. We have got the public sector wage bill that is being identified as causing a problem as well. Remember, Thabo, government has stated through Treasury that this is going to be done in the past, that there will be an attempt to try to deal with the budget, to actually cut the budget thereof. Then you had the COVID coming in, and things start falling apart. You go out and you loan money. And at the end of the day, you look at what then is left when it comes to what we've been speaking about economic reforms. And you look at it, there seems not to even be a consensus as to how to proceed on that. This government is unable to demonstrate a clear agenda, in my view, that even the unions can be persuaded by that. I often hear that when we discuss this thing, that the unions are not going to agree to public sector wage bill. And I often say that, but present a clear agenda. Public sector wage bill cut. I often say that as government, have a very clear agenda to say, this is our comprehensive economic policy agenda. We believe aspects of it entails this and that. And we think that people should compromise to be able for this policy to be implemented. The big challenge is that you hear bits and pieces. We need to cut the budget. We're doing fiscal consolidation. Those things involve the budget cut as well when the economy is actually even contracting. And some people are going to even start asking us, are we okay in our minds as well? The problem here, Thabo, is that as we are planning to do something, circumstances change because we are often slow to respond. The political consensus required to make these decisions is not coming out very well. This administration, in my view, it seems to lack a clear, persuasive agenda that actually get people to say, let's wait, this one looks like it is promising. You spoke about those ideas around creativity. When you are listening, you don't feel like saying, I'm listening to something that looks like it's persuasive, yeah? I'm listening to something that looks like it is implementable and it can actually get to somewhere. It becomes so difficult. That's why you have all these bits and pieces of plan. We improvise. It's anti-corruption. It's fiscal consolidation. It's the public sector wage bill. It's like anything else goes. It's infrastructure expenditure. At the end of the day, you cannot really tell what is the overriding agenda that actually get this government to have a criteria to say yes or no to something. What is that overriding agenda? I don't find it. I don't see it, you guys.
We'll talk more on that issue when we continue next year on In Focus. Political analyst Sanusha Naidu, Dr. Ralph Mathekga, as well as Professor Sipho Seepe. You're part of the conversation. We'll go to your WhatsApp messages as well next on In Focus. Stay with us. Back tonight here on In Focus, the conversation continues. Political analysts Sanusha Naidu, Dr. Ralph Mathekga, and Professor Sipho Seepe. Before we get to your WhatsApp messages tonight, I want us just, Sanusha, to touch on the quandaries that existed within the ANC during the former presidency of Jacob Zuma. Are they still persisting today, or are they worse under the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa? I'm not talking now at a government level, but within the party itself.
I think they'll always be part of that architecture of the party. I don't think that you are ever going to see that level of percolation of the quandaries you referenced going away anytime soon. You can see this in the way in which reactions are taking place. You can see this in the way in which responses have happened with regard to the step-aside rule, whether it was applied in a manner that was seen as, yes, we take our direction from, or we take Luthuli House seriously. And I think right now you're seeing those issues actually fragmenting even further. There's a pushback, there's a challenge. And I think in this context, President Ramaphosa, as president of the party, has to face a lot of these challenges in the party as well. Have they actually manifested further? Have they deepened? The cleavages have become much more pronounced. I do think they have. I think the reaction to the fact that the people that didn't win at Nasrec are not happy, in a very, very simplest way. I think I can't be any more simple than that. They just don't see that there's anything bigger than what they control in the party. The party has become a serious political football in terms of capture, control, and who actually gets to be in control of the party, because it has so many important dynamics and linkages and networks and patronage networks that link back to the bureaucracy of the state, that link back to how we saw state capture unfold at the Zondo Commission. And I think to a large extent, that also remains a serious blight on President Ramaphosa's presidency. As much as he's trying to clean up the party, it is a big fight. It's a terrible fight. It's a horrendous stumbling block to him as well, because at the same time, he has to deal with the fact that there are members in the ANC who don't actually recognize him as the president of the party. They're constantly having these battle lines drawn around pushing back. And I think to a large extent, we saw this in the context of what happened with regard to how the former president and the support he got when the Constitutional Court ruled that he had essentially violated the terms of appearance before the Zondo Commission, and we saw how that all came through. Today we're hearing in KZN there's a possibility that the former mayor of the eThekwini could actually still serve in some capacity in the province, so in the party as well. So I think at the end of the day, these fault lines that remain also have to be recognized in how that bureaucracy that essentially has been there from the previous presidency actually plays a critical role in stumbling blocks and weather. And just a last point on questions of irregularity and expenditure of irregularity. The Auditor General released her findings and made a presentation to Parliament today. And one of the things she said, which is very concerning, is that there's 166 million still in irregularities, and that number could rise. So there's still people that are in the bureaucracy that are not taking the anti-corruption stance seriously because maybe they feel they can get away with it.
Prof, will there ever be a president in the ANC who would be able to exercise useful authority enough in the party to be able to clean it up?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes that you find in the ANC, I mean, there are actually several. One is when you have a president who comes in and then that president is encouraged by opposition forces that are against the ANC to try to deal with the previous president. When you do that, you do not address a problem. You actually create greater tensions because the leadership that goes out also has support. So you are not dealing with one person, you're also dealing with many people. It's the same as when you go into, you become a new CEO and you say you're going to deal with the elements of the previous CEO instead of setting the agenda and a vision that it will rally people around. So that is one big mistake. The second thing is the party has not been able to be consistent that if you're going to deal with issues of corruption, you must be consistent in dealing with it wherever it rears its ugly head. It cannot be that you deal decisively with it when it is really about the people that you are opposed to or who are not on your slate. But as Sanusha says, the biggest challenge that the ANC has is that the idea of a broad church, while it may work very well in terms of voting electoral strategy, but what it does, it removes the possibility of coherence within the party, because what you have people, party with different ideological persuasions, and as time moves away from, as we move away from the liberation struggle, these contradictions are actually deepening. And what we have here, and also unfortunately for President Ramaphosa, his victory was razor thin. So that in itself meant that it could go either way. So the outcome of these elections has also emboldened other people to say there is also a rejection of the president. Yeah. And you must also understand that this is a president who was also booed by people on the ground, with not only members of the ANC, but people are saying, but Mr. President, you're promising, but you're not delivering. Yeah. So I do think that the issue of consistency is very important, and it is possible that you can find a president who does that. But the point of departure is not to try to create enemies, is to try to say, can we work together? We were part of these mistakes. And this is one of the things that has weakened this president, because he has almost, as people have put it, pretended that he saw nothing, he did nothing, he had nothing, when in fact he was part of the collective. So if you are going to talk about the collective leadership, don't try to scapegoat. And one of the challenges that we have in this country is always to find scapegoats. And as Sanusha says, what happened, the July unrest that happened in this country, suddenly, instead of trying to find what are the social causes and economic factors and how are we going to address it, we want to find scapegoats. So there we go, get the DJs, we get all sorts of people. And actually it's embarrassing. It simply means that you are, instead of dealing with the real challenges, you will simply want to find a scapegoat as if you are going to address anything. But problems don't disappear because you have found a convenient scapegoat.
A quick look at your messages tonight on WhatsApp, 072-110-5584. Pumla from the Western Cape saying presidents cannot take the blame alone, or the president cannot take the blame alone. The whole ANC is aware that they messed up in the past 10 years. Now, how do you manage that with the same people holding office? His setup and its COVID team are misleading our society. They lack consistency. We are now told to take 3 jabs, and my perception is that I don't think society will be convinced with their premature findings. Peter in Johannesburg. Zama Hans from Kabeja saying President Cyril Ramaphosa's leadership is catering to cadres in his ANC faction. Take how long it took for him to respond to the Digital Vibes scandal involving the former Minister of Health and Kusela Diko, because they were close to him. On COVID-19, he tried, even though he gave different messages of forceful vaccinations. All right, this from Twitter, Mutupi saying the biggest fear in the mind of a politician is not his failure to deliver on his manifesto promises. Instead, the biggest fear of a politician is a truly liberated constituency. Politicians are never a solution to the problems problems faced by the constituency they claim to represent. Thank you very much for those messages. Ralph, let's give you the final word here. Is indeed the analysis of a president, of the party or of the country, or is it an analysis that should broadly look into the party itself?
Well, the problem begins from within the party, Thabo, and what we have done as South Africans, we have individualized institutional problems within the ANC. The problem is the ANC, and at the center of this thing is a political party that is struggling to transform itself into a modern, functional party. What it is now, it's no longer that broad church where at least people share the same denomination. You can't have a broad church with multiple denominations. Everybody's just going to be singing in their own direction. It's not going to work. And that seems to be what is happening within the ANC. It's not a coherent party led or maybe dominated by a common shared message. It is rather a conglomeration of multiple competing groups seeking to dominate the agenda, and mostly interest groups, as I would say. I mean, one faction wins, comes out, talks about unity, and there will be another. It goes on, and you cannot do anything about it now. It is so deep that it is beyond the individual stuff.
I appreciate you all for joining us tonight. Prof Sipho Seepe, Dr. Mathekga, and Sanusha Naidu. And thank you for your messages tonight on 072 110 5584.